For years, we've tried to work with the American Society for Cinematographers. I'm really pleased that we have a panel represented here from this group. Steve Schler has agreed to be the moderator for the panel. We have an hour for this, and then we're going to head over to the theater to see some amazing footage on the IMAX screen. So if I may introduce Steve Schler. Thank you very much.
Hi, and then of course I will pass this along, and may I introduce the panelists we have today. And actually I've asked them if they'd each say 2 or 3 words, very short, about themselves, just so you understand the kind of films that they've been shooting or the work they've been involved in. So let's just start with James Nyhouse.
This on? Hello. Hi. Well, currently I'm shooting another IMAX space film to be released in a year. Title to be determined. It's the untitled Tony Myers project. Have been involved with all the space films, Dream is Alive, Blue Planet, Destiny in Space, Mission to Mirror, Hubble 3D, NASCAR, not a space movie, but a bunch of space cases, and a few others.
So, and immediately to the right is Reed Smoot.
All right, well, I've had the privilege of working in a large format since the early 80s, and also the luxury of working in other formats as well. So I certainly find the most satisfying experience in filmmaking working in the large format for obvious reasons.
And Sean Phillips, who, I'll just say it, also directs.
Yeah, well, thank you, Steve. And it is a pleasure to be here. And yeah, of films you may have seen here at the conference, I was a cinematographer on Robots for Nat Geo and also on Journey to Space. And then in the past, I've directed films like Sea Monsters for National Geographic, which was a lot of fun, really just a great experience. And I've been at it for quite a number of years, going back over the years to other films, earlier films like Bugs. Again, a great experience. And I'd like to echo Reed's statement that these are really some of the most enjoyable projects I've ever done, way above features and commercials and other work that I've done.
So part of the purpose of this panel is really to discuss cinematography for the large screen, and really the way to do this is to discuss how does it really differ from shooting for the neighborhood Cineplex on a feature film for one of the studios, or how does it really differ from shooting television documentaries, and what are the considerations here? So let's just start at a very high level and talk about some of the basic differences. So, James, what is one major difference between the big screen and anything else?
It's bigger.
and bigger is better, right?
Really bigger. Bigger is better. Framing, we'll all be talking about framing and shot size, so I think that's the big thing that everybody wants to talk about. The thing about it is your good shots look better up on the big screen, but the worst thing is your bad shots look worse. So, yeah, it's the big size.
Reed, want to add more to the differences?
Well, I think the fundamental question here really is that one has to address is the suitability of a given subject to the big screen. Does your storytelling benefit from being on a giant screen, or does it really hurt it? In other words, it's really difficult making these films, whether you're chasing animals around Madagascar, going to the space, or the Antarctic. These are not easy films to make. Those of you who have made them, it's a real challenge, always. Logistically, they're typically a challenge, and technically they're always a challenge. So the primary question is, what's the suitability of a topic to the format, and then what is necessary in the format to achieve the results that you're after? Because it's totally different than traditional narrative storytelling. They fall more in the category of documentary, sometimes docudramas that can work very successfully. But the content is really the important thing. It's all about story and trying to adapt that story to benefit from being on a giant screen.
Yeah, I would say probably to put it in a nutshell, the way to describe the format is it is inherently immersive. And it doesn't matter if it's on a dome or if it's on a giant 2D or 3D flat screen. It is, at the end of the day, an immersive and almost essentially frameless format. So in the most basic way, it's very different than a TV show because TV shows, as well as features, are frame-based. You're very aware of a frame within which the image is composed. Now, if you imagine, as I did when I was a kid, I used to sit in the front row of a theater and I'd watch a movie, and it'd strobe like crazy, and it was kind of blurry, but I kind of liked it. It was immersive. As I got older, I realized, well, you know, if you just got things sharper, and of course, as I got old enough, I discovered IMAX and realized that people had already solved that problem. And in 1986, they came out with a 3D version of that, which I thought was just incredibly stunning and a magical format. But regardless of what they are inherently immersive. And what that means, and this little slide here kind of sets us up here, is that surrounds your whole periphery. And if you're watching your film and editing your film far away, like a TV set, you're making a really big mistake. And if you're screening your film in a screening room at its full resolution, and you're sitting at the right distance, if it really looks bad and out of focus, you've got a very serious problem. So you have to rethink just about everything you do when you approach a film. Initially, just even technically, in terms of always working with the format that can give you the greatest resolution for what you're shooting. And in kind of stressing and emphasizing what Reed was mentioning, is that you have to rethink everything for an immersive format. You know, for example, all the rules you learn in documentary filmmaking, you kind of have to throw out. The things that are standards in a regular documentary film really don't work well. Lots of talking heads. You can get away with short interviews and short little bits or use them to accent pieces, but the wholesale use of those that you see in a typical documentary really don't work. It's been proven over and over. Audiences don't respond to it. You won't really be able to sell a film that's filled with a lot of talking heads. Same thing with archival footage. You have to be very clever when you use it in one of these films, but you can only use so much before audiences start to turn it off and realize they're really not getting the experience that they paid to get here.
Since you brought this up, let's just dive right in, because I know everybody wants to talk about this major difference, which is framing. Do you want to say a little more about this chart and what this all means, and then everybody could jump in on framing? But
yeah, it's
you know,
just,
you've got a lot of lines and text up there, and maybe people would love to know a little more about it.
Yeah, this is just a really good thing to get your head wrapped around to, because when you frame for a giant screen film, and this is basically the cameraman's POV, look at it this way. If you're looking through a camera, you should be at least referencing an image that looks like this, superimposed over the scene that you're trying to film. And I don't know how many people here, does this look familiar to you? How many people does this look unfamiliar to? So you're very familiar with this pattern? Is that, yeah, okay. So what it represents, the curved lines, you can probably guess, are the outlines of the dome theaters. And that's really important to keep in mind. And you notice how there's an inner white area and surrounded by a number of different gray areas and lines? Okay, anything that you're going to see in these theaters, if it's outside of those if it's in those gray areas, may not show in some theaters. So if there's an important story point that happens at the edge of the frame, or a key action, or even an object flying through frame that indicates where you're supposed to be in a scene, that will be missing from some of those theaters. So the inner kind of light area, the white area, is kind of a safe action area for the giant screen. So when you're shooting for a dome, if you're shooting for a 3D screen or a 2D flat screen, you know that it will be safe within those areas. The second most important thing is the crosshairs. Now notice there's a center crosshair, it's just the dead center of the frame, and there's one slightly below that. The one in the dead center of frame is kind of a high reference for where you're generally framing areas of interest. For example, the eyes of an actor or the eyes of an animal, could be the eyes of a bug. Anything that you're locking onto really shouldn't be above that center crosshair. Now that's not to say that sometimes it shouldn't go above it, because it's a lot of fun to play with the format, get things high in frame, actually get people looking high up in the frame, even in the domes. But as a regular course of action, when you're intercutting scenes together, and like, for example, if you've got scenes between actors or between animals, you have to be very careful not to violate that limit, because you'll be out of the general comfort area of the audience watching the film. So those are probably the most fundamental parts of this frame in which to describe. Now the dashed line is essentially the horizon line, and that's the horizon line in the standard IMAX full screen theater. And below that you see the bent line, that's the OmniMax horizon line. When you shoot, that's the line, that's where the horizon will appear in the OmniMax theater. You can see they're two very different places, and shooting a film is really a compromise between setting those positions and making and telling an acceptable story.
So Reed, you mentioned that you shoot for a number of different formats. What if you have a film where you know you're shooting for the large screen, but you also know there's going to be a standard digital cinema release. There's also going to be a television release. How does that change how you frame the picture?
Well, I mean, obviously the priority is the principal distribution of the film. And, you know, the big issue here with shooting for a giant screen is that when you sit down in front, who's not seen an IMAX film here or a giant screen film? One individual there. When you sit down in an empty theater or as a theater that's filling up and you see that blank screen, there's a certain kind of promise that that giant screen offers. And the real issue is to have a product that delivers what that big screen promises. In other words, putting anything up there isn't necessarily going to deliver what I consider the giant screen promise. The difference is it's totally different. I mean, shooting for television, shooting for giant screen, totally different approach. You just have to rethink it entirely.
So, but you know, I've switched allegiances, and now I'm more on the producing side of things. And I know that I have to get a television release, and I have to get a large format release, and I want them all to be great. I don't want just one of them to be great. So what are the producers out here going to do when they hit this?
One thing we can as always, there are a lot of compromises that we have to work out in order to make films sellable. And it does become more and more difficult all the time. And I really agree with, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, from ENS that was talking about essentially creating sometimes a separate film, i.e. in the case of the full domes. That is the perfect world. And you know, there's such a difference between the full domes and, for example, even the OmniMax domes and the regular IMAX screens, where a completely different version of the film really is the best possible option. It just is not a practical option based on the economics of the business. To, I think, kind of answer what Steve was saying, if you go 2 slides forward on the presentation there, if you stop, yeah. What I would recommend, yeah, one more slide, yeah, right here. What I would recommend thinking about is using what I call the common bottom. There used to be something called the common top framing back when standard def TV was around, and it kept actors' eye lines in about the same place. It was a far from perfect way of doing things, but we sort of have a similar situation here, except in reverse, upside down. We actually, if we maintain a common bottom, it's easier to go from format to format. So, for example, this is the way we mastered Mysteries of the Unseen World, same thing with robots. We basically create a 4K by 3K kind of full IMAX, OmniMax frame. And from that, we extract the bottom 2/3 of it to become essentially a 1:8:9 styled release. That kind of gets you in the ballpark. And obviously, you really want to go through a film and very carefully reframe it so that it plays aesthetically in all cases. But I think approaching things in this respect at least gets you into the ballpark where you can actually do that without you know, having to do massive pans and scans that degrade the resolution of the image.
So very similar to 3D, you know, I know, you know, I'll just summarize that then. We shoot for the biggest screen,
Yeah.
because we can then reach the other screens. And so, you know, I'll throw this one to you, James. How important, and there's a hint in this, how important is it that the DOP sits through the sessions where you're doing the reframing and don't just, you know, pick an area of interest and let the whole film run through it and extract that out?
Oh, that's extremely important. I mean, it's, we frame these things, as we've all said already, specifically for this big frame. And when you go in and start doing like conversions or warping like for the full domes, you can completely change the look of the image through the warping that some of these guys are doing. Evans and Sutherland, it's great technology, but you've got to be careful that you're not taking this image and making it really unwatchable in a full dome. And the DP has to be there for that process. That's the thing with digital, is as creative people that we are, we're basically, our life is hanging on everybody else's decision downstream there. It's still our name on the head of the film as the DP, but if somebody's going in there and changing the framing, the color, you know, enlarging, shrinking, doing whatever, and still our name's on the head of the credits, you know, it affects us. And that sounds kind of selfish, but it's, you know, we have to make a living. And so, but also you've got to be able to know where your subject was intended to be in that shot.
Well, I'll take that bigger than DP. It affects the film.
Affects the film. It affects the entire film, yeah. So if somebody who doesn't know what the intention of the shot was, as they're reframing it, they can just lose the entire meaning without even thinking about it.
Can I just add something to that? I think that, I think they're completely different styles of filmmaking, large format and conventional, whatever, any other format. That has not only to do with the framing, it not only has to do with, it has to do with everything. It's the pace, it's the whole, composition of a film in terms of the delivery of the information is just, it's a totally different animal. And I think you can do an extraction for a DVD release, but it really falls short of, I mean, for one thing, the length, we're basically dealing with a 40-minute length, which doesn't really lend itself to television. And because we tend to deliver imagery that allows an audience to discover information within the frame, as opposed to on television, you cut things and force an audience to look at something by cutting to a close-up and manipulating that way. It's much more, as Sean said, it's much more immersive. It allows the audience to experience the surroundings. So I think it's just a whole different approach.
True, but you and I have worked together on projects that have gone to big screens and played on television screens. Some of the concert films we've done together.
Yeah, but when you see Bono singing in front of 80,000 people, it's on a big screen. It's an amazing experience.
It's
you can still see him singing on a television, but you're going to rely more on the audio than you are on the overlap of audio visual, right? It's less of a sight experience. It becomes more of a sound.
I enjoy the visual of both, but I'm very thankful we have the large format release on that, because you're right, it is more immersive, impressive. It's it's just cooler.
And it's even better. The sound's even better in an IMAX theater.
Yeah.
Everything's better about it.
Yeah, I at the end of the day, it is like a food chain in the sense that, what are you making the film for? If you're really making a TV film that you want to do an ancillary release in large screen, well, that's not a very good use of the medium. If you're originating the film as a giant screen film, you really need to think about it as that kind of a film. Shoot it that way. You should shoot the 3D that way if it's a 3D film. You want to make it work for both the domes and the giant flat screens. And you can do it. It is a very doable type of thing with the right experience, and it's easier nowadays with the digital tools. But at the end of the day, it's true, it really won't be an ideal presentation for the other ancillary markets if you made it really primarily for this market.
And wait till you have to reframe for this.
Yeah.
So, just to finish this topic off, I know earlier we discussed it, and the term aspect ratio popped up because, we certainly see a lot of Hollywood features, which are 185 or 235, popping into large format theaters. So how do you want to address aspect? Does anybody want to tackle aspect ratio? Are we 3x4 on everything, or are you going to go bigger than that?
It's a good point. I mean, at the end of the day, there's an interesting argument for what you might call the ACEs. The Academy.
Oh, we'll get into that.
I'll let you
we're definitely
talk
going to
that.
get into that.
I'm using it by analogy. Is that you could come up with the ACEs of screens, i.e. an immersive screen that's huge like that. It has incredible resolution, let's say 8K resolution, and from that, any smaller presentation can be made. But the economics of maintaining a giant screen theater with its giant screen aspect ratio is kind of unique to this industry. And it's important to make films that fill that aspect ratio, because I don't think, we're living in ephemeral times. Things are changing all the time. And I don't think anybody, and I'm sure anybody at IMAX would agree with me, the digital system we're seeing here at Universal Studios, it's a fairly outdated model. It's soon to be upgraded to 4K. And pretty soon, you're going to want to fill that whole screen back up once the projectors have the capability. And that's going to happen quickly. Things change very fast now, and that's what's necessary for the immersive experience. That's what makes it a frameless experience. That's what gets you into the action, and I think that's what you want to design your films for, and essentially future-proof them against that.
Well, if those of you who are at USC have been over to USC's lab, the IMAX theater there, they have the wider aspect ratio, 190, I think that screen is. Matt Scott, are you here? 190, is that right? yeah, but they built the room so that you could go up to the full height. So even IMAX and you guys were planning ahead to migrate back to our roots, which is the tall, immersive screen. So we're not terminally stuck in this wider format or skinnier, lower aspect ratio, whatever you want to call it. That.
Letterboxed.
Yes. Yeah.
So this has come up a few times now, even in this discussion, and that is film, digital. How do you pick what's the right tool for the job? And we'll get into future-proofing later, but how do you pick the right tool for the job?
Shoot film.
Shoot film.
And there you have it.
I'd like to comment on that if I may.
Yeah, Marie, go.
Again, the subject matter determines the format and the tools. And I'm going to refer to a film that was beautifully produced by Taryn and George and directed by Daniel. A few years ago, we did a film in Jerusalem. And the concept of the film was to not only share the scope and scale of the environment, but also to share the intimacy on a very much a people level. And this was a 3D film. We knew we couldn't carry around this Lido camera and effectively shoot handheld. For those of you who don't know that cameras, it's the size of a Volkswagen. The bottom line is that we knew we had to adapt some digital technology because we knew we wanted to use the Steadicam to really get immersive, to really get inside, and close to people. So we used the best technology that was available at that time. There was a commitment made early on to shoot all of the aerials, 15 perf, which is where it really paid off. Those of you who have seen the film, the aerials are stupendous, photographed by Ron Goodman. We made a real attempt to shoot all of the wide shots that where resolution really pays off, 15 perf. And also during the production, we used the new Sony at the time f6.5, which is a high-resolution digital capture, which proved to be very effective. So again, you choose the right tool for the job, and that has to be determined by the concept, because the story and the content is still the most important thing. And then available tools. Unfortunately, technology is evolving quickly enough that it's getting better and better. We're not quite there. We're in a gray zone between the excellence of film, the film emulsion, and 15 perf, and the best digital. But we're getting there slowly. And the important thing is that it's progressing. You're going to see some tests that were shot by James and other folks that will reveal kind of where we're coming and how we're kind of closing the gap. But it's a ways off yet. But still, 1570, it's hard to beat.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. But I do want to add a qualifier because, as a frequent violator of using 1570, I wasn't able to shoot 1570 on either of the two films that showed here. But thankfully, we weren't shooting any aerials with it. We were not making demands of a digital camera that it really is not capable of achieving yet. And I think that's a critical area to draw the line, because there are a lot of amazing possibilities from digital, but it's not a one-size-fits-all type of a situation. Believe it or not, film at 1570, there's no camera that can rival that yet in terms of resolution digitally. I'm sure that will happen soon. There's already 8K cameras that are going to be coming in very shortly that I think will rival the quality of film, but they're not here. They're not usable production tools yet, but they will be very shortly. In terms of other formats, lower resolutions, probably the best way to think about that is a size and distance relationship. In other words, as things get closer to you, you don't need as much resolution. So you can use a little bit more exotic camera systems if they're getting you something that you couldn't otherwise have gotten with film. And there's a lot of things you couldn't have gotten. You can't get amazing performances out of wildlife by just having a hard drive loop through over and over and over again, where you wait until the animal does what you're hoping he's going to do and then you call cut. That's just not a real possibility with film. And now you can get 4K systems that do that readily. You can get 4K systems that can do very high frame rates, And again, as long as you're not doing wide scenes, and high speed is usually fairly intimate and close. Anything that's intimate and close responds well to lower resolutions and can be used as long as you take very cautious attention to use it appropriately. It's where people suddenly think they can shoot a whole movie with a GoPro because it's 4K that things start to fall apart. It's really a very, very, it's kind of an exciting process because new cameras are coming out all the time. I never thought I'd be bewildered by the pace of change with cameras, but sometimes I am, I have to admit. There's so many new things coming out that are fantastic. But at the end of the day, the problem we've been having with this format, and all of us here, Reed and James and myself in particular, it is frustrating that we can't do films that really create the stunning vistas that we used to be able to shoot in years past when we could shoot on 1570, contact print onto 1570, and present it onto a screen. So there's still a big gap that we really need to work hard to close in the future.
The other thing is you just can't take something out of a 4K camera and put it up on the screen. You have to do some post-processing, denoise, sharpening. You'll see the result of some of that in the tests that we'll show in the morning. The other thing I'd like to say is like Sean said, with digital, use it for what it does best. And like you said, it's the close-up stuff. We're using digital in space because, one, we can't get any film back from space station just because of weight restrictions. So we're having to shoot digital. So if we wanted anything at all, we were forced into a digital medium. But it's also a two-edged sword because we're able to record longer. We're able to get really nice sound with the stuff, which we could never gotten before. You can never just let the camera run and let the astronauts do the fun things they've done for us on this film. So it's creating a better, we're improved our storytelling, I think, with digital in this aspect, as long as you use it in the proper method and at the proper time. And like I said, you can't just take it and put it on the screen as is. You have to do some post-process work with it, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, stick it in one side of the machine, take it out of the other. It's pretty much on a shot-by-shot basis to get the best results from digital up to that big screen. You just can't go, okay, in here, out there, put it on the screen. You've got to have the patience and the wherewithal to make it to work with that post-process facility.
And just a short commercial about tomorrow. While I haven't seen it, I know it's critically important to up-res digital if you're going out to a large screen, so I hope everybody does make it to see these tests tomorrow, because that is a critical piece of the path, and one that if you're shooting digital, you can't skip. So, I'm sure there's agreement on everybody here. Well, we haven't jumped in yet, but let's jump into 3D. I mean, when do you choose when it's appropriate to shoot a film in 3D versus 2D, or stereo versus 2D?
Well, they used to say if you can't make a good film, at least make it 3D so you can sell it, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't, the novelty is, the novelty is gone.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that ship has sailed. Yeah, it's an interesting thing about 3D is that in a lot of respects it's very different than the traditional 2D movies, because when it's used to its fullest advantage, it is immersive in a very personal way, not just surrounding your periphery, for example, like when you go outside. It's surrounding your periphery in terms of personal intimacy and personal space. So on a lot of levels, it is a fundamentally different experience. Immersive, but in a very different way. So the question is if you're making a movie about landscapes or, distant scenes, it's very tough to make that a 3D movie unless you do some very, very clever thinking along the script writing lines. In other words, as DPs and I think Reed is the master of amazing exteriors on the giant screen. Is there things that cinematographers can use to dress in spatially in the overhead that complement a landscape that are very effective in 3D, but they're not so effective as to really make it a calling call for the use of that medium in the first place. What I liked about a film like Jerusalem was it managed to achieve both goals, in the sense that obviously those huge vistas are part of everyone's kind of image of the place, from epic movies that we saw as kids and myths and legends and everything that's kind of surrounds our culture. But it also told an intimate story about families and people being together, which worked really well. You had the best of both worlds. And I think that's where, the script writing and the experience of the script writer and the directors that did that film, I have no idea who they were, brought to that project. And it really involves a creative use of thinking to actually integrate those two and make a story that works on both those levels.
So either you two want to add more about, or should we just move on past that subject? Go, you get hired for a project and they tell you if it's 2D or 3D and you go along with it.
Well, we have to make a living,
Yeah.
I
Well,
think,
you
yeah.
make it.
Just to summarize down to
I'm not a real huge fan of 3D, but the last 4 or 5 big screen films I've done have been 3D. So, and I think they've done pretty well. But yeah, 3D doesn't make the movie. It's like Reed said, it's going to make a bad script probably worse, even though it will sell probably. But it can sure take your good script and make it bad if we don't do it right. You have to take the time to learn how the medium works. And like Sean said, it's a personal medium. It's up close and personal. You're not got the big giant screen aspect of that anymore. It has become more in your face, and you're more involved with it than you are with the flat screen, as far as I'm concerned.
I was going to say, from an artistic standpoint, it's really not that much different than technically it is, but from an artistic standpoint, you try to make every image that you do as immersive as you can by revealing information and so forth, especially in large format, because that's one of the joys for an audience, is to come around a corner and discover something, or do a lift over, and it's all those gotcha moments. So it's not really that much different than conventional photography in large format, other than the technical disciplines of having the right equipment in the right place.
So I think somebody already said it. The idea that 3D is going to make your movie better, that ship sailed a long time ago because of the proliferation of 3D in commercial theaters. It's no longer a novelty. So it's not going to fix a bad movie. 3D doesn't make bad movies into better movies, and maybe it does make it worse, although it's just not good. It's still about story, and I know everybody here agrees. It is still about story, and it's also about using pictures to tell that story. From some of my work, I know that digital projection is not only here, but it's also coming in the commercial theaters, which means laser is coming in very, very soon, which means a much larger color space is soon to be available to us. We can get into issues of how do you time for both a xenon world, a digital world, and a laser world. That's for another panel. But with the idea that you have access to any film you start today will probably find a release in a wider color space, how do you shoot to preserve this? I mean, how do you shoot so you call it the fattest negative? It's especially on digital. With film, you could always go back and rescan. But when you shoot digital, whatever you do, you've got it. It's baked. So what do you do digitally? And then I could jump in on that. Go ahead and say that one.
Well, no, I mean,
because a lot of people don't hire DITs for those shows.
Well, the whole process, of course, is one of many people working to achieve what you're talking about. It isn't just, the cameraman or whatever. You rely, especially in the digital world, when you're on location, you're doing downloads, you have a digital tech. It's a very collaborative sort of process. So, Sean, you can get more technical.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, one thing we know is going to happen. Resolutions are going to go up. Dynamic range is going to increase. Color space is going to increase. So essentially, it's fairly simple in that respect. You try to capture with the widest possible gamut that you can afford to capture it at. It's that simple.
And then preserve it.
And then preserve it. And hopefully interoperability between other color spaces. So, for example, you still want your movie to be able to play on a regular home screen that somebody plays at home. Let's say if they bought a Blu-ray or something, the film, you want the colors to bear some resemblance, hopefully a good resemblance, to what you were going for when you saw it on the monitor on the set, or when you actually pictured it in your head, which actually is how sometimes you have to work with documentaries. You don't have a DIT, or maybe you have a DIT for some scenes that you're doing on sets or whatever, but you don't have it in the field. But the director of photography has a good vision of what the image should look like. That's why they have the job. So preserving that is the key component of that job, and facilitating that with the best equipment that you can shoot with is really, that's a no-brainer. You just try to get the best you possibly can. And the skill and experience of the cinematographer is knowing what to avoid. What are the shortcuts that really bite you in the back at the end of the day.
And it's really not that different than analog acquisition. I mean, you do proper exposure, you use a meter, and you balance the light, you balance the frame, and it's not that much different.
Yet I've seen it destroyed more often than not. So, and I'll jump in on that one.
Let me say that the work that we've done together, the concert work all around the world, we have light changes with a rock concert. So you've got somebody in the control room that's writing the stop and everything else the whole time. That's very different than conventional.
Yeah. I'm not even
shooting.
including those.
Right.
And a lot today, you should be, I mean, we're basically picking cameras now like we pick film stock in the days past. And you have, like we did with film stock, you have to do film tests. You have to shoot tests. You have to know where that camera is going to land everything, where that sensor is going to land everything, where it's going to land the colors. You've got to keep it within the range that's going to be most flexible for you. That's one of the things I found working with the C500 is there's a range that camera likes to be in, and if you get outside of that range, you can be in deep trouble. That was one of the toughest parts I had training the astronauts is, it may not look good to you right now, but trust me, if it's in this range, we can take it to where we need to take it. And I think that's a lot of it. And like I say, testing.
So, you know what, I can't help it. I have to throw a few words on this. I was producing the large format project in New York earlier in the year, and the first thing I did was sit down. Oh, just to backtrack a little, the term DIT, or DIT, has come up a couple of times in the last few seconds, which means digital imaging technician. If you shoot digital, they're really in control of how that signal is recorded, laid down amongst 30 other jobs they have, but it's a key position if you're shooting digital and you want consistency and something that resembles a really large fat negative. But back to this other film, I sat down with the DIT, the director of photography, the visual effects people, the post house, the post-production coordinator, and anybody who's remotely even touching what we're shooting, and made sure that they all understood a couple of things. There's a color space you can work in called ACES, which was developed by the Academy and the ASC, and the rule was everybody touching this data works in ACES, because then I know at the back end we've got something big enough to go out to a number of different formats or color spaces. There are other ways to do it as well. That's my preferred way, but the point of all this is consistency. Everybody touching the data understood that never put it on a machine that's going to drop it below 16-bit, never put it on a machine or in any color space other than ACES, because then you say, oh, we'll just convert it back again, but you can't keep moving the color space around without losing things. So if you're making films, just be consistent, make sure everybody touching it understands what the post path is and what the critical do-nots are. And the do-nots are, don't compromise the data in the color space because we want something at the end. You agree with that? All right, end of my sermon.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that has really been improving a lot just in the last year or two is color interoperability. In other words, it was just a nightmare between film and between digital suites and color monitors. They all looked very different, and it required a huge overhead to keep it balanced. Now the tools have been advanced considerably to where, for example, on the robots film, which was a fairly low budget film, we were basically color timing it in Scratch at the production company, and we checked the interoperability between different companies. We'd see how it played at Dolby, we see how it played at Photochem, which we used as kind of a benchmark to see how it would refer back to their film outs in 1570, and then we filmed it out in 1570. We screened it at the Science Center downtown, and we found that actually the color match was quite good. The biggest challenge was just the brightness of the theater. That was what was a huge factor, where the brightness of the theater suddenly has a huge influence on how your images actually look. So the ASIS, I think, really represents kind of the crowning glory of being able to say, okay, we've got this whole Tower of Babel of color spaces that we've been wallowing in for the last 20, 30 years digitally. Finally, there's a pool that's big enough to accept them all, in which any one of them can be looked up. So in the future, if you want to go back and look at what Rec 709 looked like, you can see it, and it will look like what you timed it on the day you did in that suite that was properly timed and balanced into that system. So that's been a very positive but a very long struggle, I think, a very frustrating one for me as a cinematographer. So that's a ray of hope.
You know, the whole goal of this is high dynamic range and consistency. I want the colors to be the same on this screen, and this screen, and this screen, and this screen, in all these different environments. That's the idealistic goal, and then we just do everything we can to try and hit that. I think we have time for 2 more questions, and then we'll turn over to question and answer. So one of them is, you know, the difference in the role of the DOP on a large format film as opposed to other types of documentaries not for large format or feature films working for one of the studios. You know, there's a lot more involvement in other phases, such as, you know, story, budgeting, post-production. I mean, do you find you get the opportunity to become more involved? And would you tell all the producers sitting out here that you should be? Yeah. Okay, that got a yeah. That got a yeah.
Yeah, we can always say no.
Well, I'm just going to say it completely depends.
As long as you pay their day rate.
It completely depends on the circumstance of the film, of the personalities and everything else. There is a lot more overlap in large format work because typically it's a much more intimate kind of approach to filmmaking. It's much smaller. And it's very dependent upon the personalities. You know, in some situations you've got, you know, a more dictatorial situation where the director wants to make all the decisions, but in the best case, it's collaborative.
Yeah, let's always try and shoot best case here. So, do you get involved in even the budgeting sessions? Certainly the story sessions.
Yeah, usually the budgeting is a reactive kind of thing where you say, hey, this camera's too expensive. What can we do about this? It's understandable. That's the producer's job. They got to make it fit. It's part of my job to, you know, fit what we can into that 10-pound bag, even though, you know, we all want to be more ambitious than not be ambitious. But yeah, no, I've been very lucky in this business, and that's one thing I particularly enjoy about the giant screen business is being involved in productions through post, which is, you know, that's almost impossible for cinematographers doing feature films to do. Part of it is necessity because a lot of the films that I do are 3D, and being involved in the 3D is also very critical through post-production. You know, what Hollywood has given us in terms of 3D, in terms of live action, is a very homogeneous product. It's not immersive. Look at how good the 3D is in animated films from Disney and from DreamWorks, and look at how pedestrian. I mean, I'm sorry, you know, I have not seen a single Hollywood 3D film that was worth watching in 3D. Not one, not one. So, you know,
I could name one, but it hasn't been released in this country because of politics. But that would be, you know, The Prodigious Tia Spivet.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but
is absolutely worth seeing in 3D. Just to throw that in there.
Great. Well, that could be the
Someday
first one.
it'll get released here. What was it? It's a film by Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who happens to be one of my favorite directors, who made a film in English, you know, called The Young and Prodigious Tia Spivet, and it's about a little boy's journey. Interesting. It's based on a book, and Jeunet never shoots with anything wider than a 32 millimeter lens anyway, so he's perfect for 3D shooting. But he made this absolutely beautiful, incredible movie that the Weinstein Company's not going to release until he recuts it, and he's Jeunet, so he's never going to recut it. So eventually that argument will end, and the film will get released. And it is out. If you have a Region 2 Blu-ray, you can buy a 3D Blu-ray from Amazon France, which I have. So it's a beautiful movie. Anyway, sorry, that's one I could throw out. You
didn't like Hugo?
My hat was off.
Dimitri was the stereographer on both.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I thought Hugo was, my hat was off to him because it was a valiant effort to kind of break the mold and do something more interesting with the stereo. The problem is that They wanted to shoot with somewhat longer lenses than what is optimal for stereo, and there's a very simple solution technically for doing that. It's called multi-rigging, and it's something, I mean, I remember doing it, you know, many, many years ago on Siegfried and Roy. You basically shoot your foreground characters against green screen, and you shoot it at one interaxial. You shoot the background at a different one, and that allows you, then you have a much freer range of what lenses you can use. But that is a huge thing to ask of a live action director because it affects performances, it affects the whole drama of the film. And I think they tried to sort of strike a balance, but I don't think it was quite successful because for me, what I noticed is it kept pulling me out of the story because there were such disparities in the way the stereo was done from shot to shot to shot. So, you know, I admire the effort that was done. And I hope nobody's got a gun here or something, but I think that's a challenge. It was, you know, it was like one of those, that's an awesome challenge. And the reason that the DreamWorks films and the Disney films are so good in 3D is that their animation, you know, post is all mixed in with production. It's a very different pipeline. You can change your mind as long as you are willing to just re-render your shot. And you can design your stereo. You know how your film is cut as you go. So it's a lot harder when you're doing that on a set in live action. Much, much harder. So it's almost impossible.
Yeah, I would throw gravity in there too. But,
Oh, don't get me started on that.
okay. So let's see if we do one more. You know, we could talk about DI sessions. Are there differences in DI sessions between a large format experience as a director of photography and feature films? You want to throw anything in on that, or you find it similar?
The DI pipeline?
Not the
conventional film?
pipeline, but the actual supervisory time, the care you take with tweaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's your whole image. But no, I was very lucky, like in late 80s, I started doing, I was doing VFX supervision. And we were, you know, essentially it was a digital pipeline back then, but at very low resolution. And that was a really key turning point to me where it was like, okay, this is really the wave of the future. So it's a wonderful tool, and it's great that it's gotten to that same level for the higher resolution formats.
So Lisa's just informed us we have 5 minutes. So let's throw it open to some Q&A. I don't know if there's a microphone to run around, so just speak up. And there's a hand up.
Repeat the question, please.
I'll repeat the question.
You just touched upon, in the last couple of answers, the role of the stereographer,
Yes.
who was otherwise not mentioned in any of your comments. So if you could address the role of the stereographer in large format, and how involved are they from the beginning to the, you know, delivery?
So the question was, we've touched on or mentioned the name, you know, the role of stereographer a few times here. So how important is the stereographer to all of this process? And this is a cinematography panel, not a 3D panel, so we've kind of stayed away from it. But go ahead, who wants to jump on that?
Well, Sean is a stereographer.
Yeah, I am a DP stereographer, so you know, I combine those roles, but essentially the stereographer should really be part of the camera crew and should be under the control of the camera department. You know, I know both Reed and James work with some very, very excellent, experienced stereographers that understand the uniqueness of this format. But I think keeping that under the control of the camera department is essential. Otherwise, it just turns into a committee process. The vision is lost, and you just don't get as good a result otherwise.
And just to put that in importance, in the last film, I was the hyphenate producer stereographer because it is important to stay involved all the way through if you want a good 3D film at the back end.
Question, please. So we've heard a couple of times today, you know, different resolutions, 6K, 8K, 4K. I just had an experience last week with some very experienced filmmakers who were super excited because they were shooting 4K. And then when I asked them what camera they were shooting, it turned out that they were shooting at 422 8-bit and intending it to go to the giant screen. So can you guys just talk a little bit about the fallacy of resolution? You know, like when we talk about 6K, well, 6K by the time it's debayered turns out to be 4K. Can you just, without getting too technically deep, just tell us a little bit more? It's all you, Sean. Thank you.
Yeah, again, it's the question of what's the right tool for the job. I'll be honest, well, actually, maybe I'll talk about that tomorrow, but believe it or not, any camera, even at 422, can be made to work. It's just the conditions under which it will look good become very, very restricted. You can't do wide shots with it. You can't even do medium wide shots with it. Maybe you can do close-ups if it's done well and it's lit correctly. The issue of Bayer versus 3 chips, which used to be standard for broadcast, is a question of resolution. So when a camera, for example, says that it's 4K, what it really means is that the green channel has half the number of 4K pixels as a full sampling would have. And the other colors are even worse. Like blue has a quarter of the samples and red has a quarter of the samples. So your 4K camera essentially has, like 3K green and 1.5K blue and 1.5K red. So really, the higher the sampling of the camera, that gets you into a more adequate realm. Even an 8K camera with a Bayer chip, it's going to have like really a 6K resolution in the green, and it's going to have 3K in the red, and it's going to have 3K in the blue. So the more you can oversample your image, always the better. I guess that's the short answer.
And hopefully not too technical, although you could dive deep on the technical side of that one. So, Miles, did that get you partway there? There he is. Okay, more questions, and then Lisa, you just keep track for us.
Just really quickly, we haven't talked much about camera motion, moving the camera, panning and tilting. Sorry if I cut someone off. Can I just really quickly, knowing that every move of the camera is actually a move of the entire theater, have you touch upon things that new and emerging filmmakers should keep in mind about how to move the camera? Thank you.
One of the best pieces of advice I got about moving the camera was from George Casey, and he said funeral was the pace to move it. So slow is good. You've got, especially with digital and to some extent with film as well, you lose resolution as you pan and tilt. So the less you do that, the better off you are. And I'm a firm believer, if the story doesn't call for the camera to pan or tilt or move, don't move it. Because the camera shouldn't be there to move, it should be there to tell the story. And if the story is movement is part of the story, then you move the camera.
Well, I disagree with that. It is a moving picture. No, I think that there are certain kinds of moves that lend themselves much better to the large format. Diagonal moves in, pull back, rises are much more forgiving than lateral moves. And if you're moving laterally and you can lock onto something to give the audience something to look at as opposed to just a bunch of a blur, there's a whole series of shots that work much more successfully in large format that you just kind of have to pay attention to. As Daniel pointed out, you're really moving the theater, and a lot of people have a hard time with that. A lot of people have a hard time even, with the gotcha shots where you go over a cliff or, whatever. So you have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the panning and tilting is the least interesting kind of a camera move. It's moving through space that makes the shots more interesting. So maybe think spatially instead of just reframing. Reframing, if you're following an actor, that's good, but just fairly random pans and tilts are not they're not very effective even in a regular film for that matter.
And then you throw 3D into that mix.
That's just what I was going to mention, is it's much better to move the camera into a close-up in 3D than it is to cut into a close-up. So let it work longer for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we have time for one more question. So one more question, or is it your turn, Lisa? It's your turn.
You guys answered everything. That was awesome, right? Thank you.